Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you.
Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you. That's what Beckett Aldridge, the billionaire CEO of Aldridge Sky Tours, said out loud, smirking as he looked a young black waitress straight in the eye. His voice echoed off the glass walls of the Savannah rooftop, loud enough for every assistant, guest, and executive around him to hear. The moment the words left his mouth, people laughed. Real laughter. Cruel, dismissive, like he'd just cracked the world's best joke. He hadn't. Because standing across from him wasn't just some server with a tray full of sparkling water and citrus slices. Her name was Ayanna Rhodes. She was young, striking, with sun-kissed brown skin, sharp eyes, and a presence that made you pause without knowing why. But nobody paused. Nobody noticed. Except Ayanna. She didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She just tilted her head, looked Beckett dead in the face, and said, "I'm serious. I can fly that aircraft." That's where this black story begins, not in a cockpit or a battlefield, but on a resort rooftop, where power, race, and perception collided in one moment of arrogance. And what followed? It wasn't just a ride through the Georgia sky. It was a flight into the truth about who we see and who we refuse to see. Beckett was desperate. His charter pilot was out with a broken wrist, and a 10-figure contract in the Bahamas was hanging in the balance. No flights, no pilots, no options. Until the waitress spoke up. This wasn't just a stunt. It wasn't a line out of a movie. This was real. And what he thought was a joke would end up revealing the quiet strength of a woman who had already survived storms far more brutal than corporate pressure. Welcome to Hidden Worth, the channel where we pull back the curtain and shine light on the people who are often overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. If you believe in second chances, in grit over gloss, in stories that challenge everything we think we know, then don't go anywhere. Because Ayanna Rhodes is about to fly, and her story might just leave you speechless too. Strap in, let's go. Beckett Aldridge had never been told no in his life, not by his teachers, not by his board, and certainly not by anyone serving him a drink. Born into old money and educated at Ivy League schools, Beckett wasn't just wealthy, he was connected. Groomed since childhood to run the Aldridge empire, he inherited Aldridge Sky Tours at just 27 and grew it into one of the leading luxury aviation brands in North America. Private jets, custom air yachts, helicopter experiences for the ultra-rich. Everything Beckett touched turned to gold. Or at least, that's how the headlines framed it. Behind the scenes, it was less about brilliance and more about brute force. He was ruthless, sharp-tongued, and unapologetically cocky. The kind of man who ordered $300 steaks, sent them back twice, and never tipped unless it was to impress someone. At 34, Beckett was a tall, square-jawed fixture in Forbes and business podcasts. Perfect hair, tailored suits, teeth whitened to perfection. But if you looked past the polish, you'd find something colder underneath. He didn't believe in kindness. He believed in leverage. He ran his company like a war room, tight deadlines, brutal expectations, zero tolerance for excuses. His assistants called him the elevator, because if you got in his good graces, your career rose overnight. But if you crossed him, you were out, instantly. That morning in Savannah, Beckett wasn't just on vacation. He was on a mission. He had secured a private negotiation with a luxury Caribbean hotel chain looking to upgrade its entire island fleet of air transport. It was the kind of deal that came once in a decade, a multi-year contract worth hundreds of millions. His helicopter was supposed to get him to the company's private island off the Bahamian coast. In under 2 hours, they'd sign. Everything had been choreographed perfectly. Champagne brunch, helicopter fueled, team briefed, then disaster. His pilot slipped on the rooftop tile and broke his wrist right there on the helipad. The second pilot was still in Miami. Time ticked down. That's when he saw her, Ayanna, standing nearby with a tray in her hand, waiting for someone to dismiss her. Or worse, ignore her completely. Instead, Beckett gave her attention. But not respect, not belief. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," he said, mocking the very idea. What he didn't know was that he had just lit a fuse, and it was about to blow everything he thought he knew wide open. Ayanna Rhodes didn't look like someone who once flew through combat zones, not in that moment, anyway. That morning, She wore a neatly pressed black uniform, her apron spotless, her dark hair pulled into a low bun beneath her serving cap. She moved like clockwork, smooth, steady, precise, refilling water glasses, replacing napkins, smiling when smiled at, blending in. And that's exactly what she wanted. But behind those soft brown eyes and that quiet grace was a past she never spoke about, not even to her co-workers, especially not to them. Most of them just called her the black girl with the good smile, and only remembered her name when they needed something extra. And Ayanna let them. Because every time someone underestimated her, she stayed one step ahead. Ayanna grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, raised by her grandmother, a woman who believed in three things: faith, discipline, and keeping your head high no matter what. Her mother died young. Her father, a name on a birth certificate. At 16, Ayanna joined the Civil Air Patrol, just for fun. By 20, she was flying military rescue helicopters over flood zones in Louisiana. She didn't join the Air Force for glory. She did it for the structure, the stability, the sky. Flying was the only place she ever felt truly free. But 3 years ago, that freedom came crashing down. A mission in Honduras went wrong. Her co-pilot, her closest friend, was badly injured during a chaotic landing. Ayanna blamed herself, even when the investigation cleared her. She left the service with honors, and a heart she hadn't figured out how to heal. She moved to Savannah looking for peace. She took a job beneath her qualifications because it was quiet, flexible, and paid enough to cover her tiny apartment and her therapy sessions. Every morning, she biked to work, tucked her badge in her apron, and became invisible. Until Beckett Aldridge opened his mouth. Until that rooftop. Until that moment. Ayanna hadn't flown in over a year. Not once. Not even in a simulator. But when Beckett mocked her with that offer, "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," something clicked. Not in anger. In purpose. Because when you've been to the edge of the sky and made it back, no man in a white suit gets to decide your worth. Not anymore. The rooftop of the Shoreline Grand Resort was buzzing. Waitstaff cleared the brunch spread, assistants barked into earpieces, and Beckett Aldridge paced in frustration near the chopper. The blades sat still, mocking him with their silence. His $1 million opportunity was slipping through his manicured fingers, and there was no backup pilot in sight. Then came Ayanna's voice. "I can fly it." She hadn't shouted. She didn't need to. Her words were sharp, calm, and landed like a pin drop in a crowded room. Heads turned. Conversations froze. Beckett stopped mid-step and slowly turned toward her, squinting behind his designer sunglasses. "You." He didn't have to laugh. His tone did it for him. Ayanna nodded once, firm. "Yes, sir. I'm certified on multiple models, including the Bell 429. I can fly it." For a moment, it was dead quiet. Then someone in Beckett's entourage, a young VP in loafers and a Rolex too big for his wrist, let out a short, sharp laugh. Beckett followed. "Oh, that's rich," he said, smirking. "Sweetheart, no offense, but this isn't DoorDash. We're not asking you to deliver sandwiches. We're talking about flying 6 tons of metal over open water." Someone snorted, another chuckled. Even a couple of resort staff nearby looked down to avoid getting pulled into the spectacle. Ayanna didn't move. She didn't blink. "I'm qualified, and it's either me or that contract doesn't make it to the Bahamas." Beckett raised an eyebrow, stepping closer now. "All right then," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell you what, you fly this thing, land it safe on that island, and I'll marry you." Laughter erupted. Loud, cruel, not the laughter of a joke well told, but the laughter of people certain they're above you. The laughter of men who've never had to earn respect, of women who smile beside them. Complicit and polished. Ayanna stood in the middle of it all alone. Not because she was wrong, but because she dared to be right in front of the wrong people. No one saw the steel in her spine. No one saw the flight hours, the simulations, the years of training etched into her muscle memory. They just saw a young black woman in an apron, daring to interrupt the power structure with 5 words, "I can fly it." And when Beckett turned his back, chuckling like the matter was closed, Ayanna made a choice. She stepped toward the helicopter. Not to prove anything to them. but to prove something to herself. Ayanna didn't hesitate. She walked past the rows of stunned faces, past the smirking suits, the whispering assistants, and the servers who stared in disbelief. Her black sneakers hit the concrete helipad with quiet confidence. She moved like a woman who knew exactly where she was going and why. Beckett Aldridge watched her with raised brows, half amused, half annoyed. He leaned toward one of his staff and muttered, "She's serious. Oh, this is gonna be good." Ayanna ignored him. She reached the helicopter, an immaculate Bell 429, polished to a shine, rotors still and waiting. She climbed in like it was muscle memory. Because it was. The second she shut the door, the world outside went quiet. It was just her in the cockpit now, her sanctuary, her battlefield, her home. She ran the pre-flight check with fluid motion. Ignition, instruments, rotor systems. Everything responded like it had missed her. Her hands didn't shake, her breath was steady. Outside, the crowd shifted awkwardly. Nobody was laughing now. Even Beckett's smirk had faded a little. The engine roared to life. The rotor blades began to spin, slow at first, then faster, slicing through the air like a warning. Ayanna's headset buzzed. A crackled voice came through. It was one of the resort's ground controllers, confused. "Pilot, identify yourself. Repeat, identify." She pressed the mic. "Rhodes. Ayanna Rhodes. Civilian. Former USAF. License ID. 28, Bravo Kilo 7. Taking off under executive authority with company asset." A long pause. Then, "Copy that. Cleared for lift." Beckett squinted up at the rising chopper. The laughter had completely stopped now. Guests shaded their eyes, staring up at the woman they'd mocked minutes ago, now ascending into the sky with elegance, power, and complete control. Ayanna lifted off cleanly. No drag, no lurch. Just a smooth, professional rise like she'd done it yesterday. And then she banked right, hugging the coastline, her flight path clean and flawless. Every movement was efficient, beautiful, like choreography in the sky. People stood frozen, a few pulled out phones, filming in silence. Beckett didn't speak. Couldn't. He just watched her disappear into the horizon. And in that moment on that rooftop, with champagne glasses half full and mouths completely shut, everyone knew exactly what had just happened. They hadn't witnessed a lucky guess. They'd witnessed mastery. Ayanna wasn't just flying that helicopter. She was flying straight through every limit they'd ever tried to place on her. The chopper cut through the sky like a blade. Inside, the cabin was calm, except for Beckett Aldridge. Strapped into the passenger seat behind Ayanna, he sat frozen, hands gripping the armrests, jaw tight, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Ayanna, on the other hand, looked like she belonged there. Her posture was relaxed, her grip steady. She wore the headset like it was part of her skin. Her eyes flicked between instruments and the horizon like nothing could touch her, not even gravity. Beckett tried to shake off the unease. This was just luck, muscle memory from a few online lessons, right? He leaned forward. "You've done this before." Ayanna didn't glance back. "A few times." Beckett let out a short breath. "What, like with friends? Flight school drop-in?" She flicked a switch, adjusted trim, voice flat. "Air Force. 6 years. 2 overseas deployments. Helicopter search and rescue. Rank captain. Discharged with honors." Beckett blinked. "What?" Ayanna glanced at him in the mirror. "You heard me." The words didn't compute right away. He stared out the window, watching the coastline blur beneath them, struggling to put the pieces together. The girl with the apron, the woman flying the bird like it was an extension of her soul. None of it made sense, and all of it did. "You were military?" he asked, this time softer. Ayanna nodded once. "Until my co-pilot got injured during a mission I should have aborted. I've lived with that choice ever since." Silence filled the cabin. Beckett sat back, stunned. The woman he'd just mocked in front of his entire team was a decorated vet, a trained pilot, someone who had more flight hours than most of his executives had in meetings. And here she was flying him to his own business deal, after being humiliated in public. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. She gave a slight shrug. Would you have listened? Beckett had no answer for that. The truth was no, he wouldn't have. He would have laughed. Like everyone else. Because she wasn't dressed like someone important. Because she didn't talk like someone powerful. Because she was a black woman in a service uniform, and that was all he saw. But now? Now he saw precision, command, strength he couldn't buy. The kind of strength that wasn't loud but undeniable. Ayanna tilted the bird into a graceful descent as the island helipad came into view. Beckett felt the weight of his silence, of his ignorance. And for the first time in a long time, Beckett Aldridge, the man who always had the upper hand, felt small. Long before the headset, the flight suit, or the Bell 429, Ayanna Rhodes had known struggle. She was born in Savannah, Georgia, the youngest of 3 in a single-parent household. Her mother worked 2 jobs, housekeeping during the day, night shift at a diner. Every dollar stretched thin. Every dream postponed for the sake of rent, groceries, and keeping the lights on. Ayanna learned early that the world didn't hand out grace easily. Not to girls who looked like her, not to black girls with big dreams and bigger obstacles. She was 8 the first time she saw a helicopter up close. It wasn't on TV or in a movie. It was a Coast Guard chopper hovering above the river during a rescue drill. Ayanna watched it from a school field trip, her face pressed against the chain-link fence, mesmerized. While the other kids lost interest and moved on, she stayed frozen, eyes locked on the sky. She told her mother that night, "I'm gonna fly one of those someday." Her mother smiled, exhausted but proud. "Then you better work harder than everyone else." And Ayanna did. She studied while others partied. She enrolled in JROTC in high school, became squad leader by junior year. She applied to every scholarship, every prep program, and finally earned a full ride to a state college with an ROTC pathway. But even in uniform, she was underestimated. Commanders questioned her leadership. Male cadets mocked her behind her back, some to her face. Too pretty, too soft-spoken, too extra for aviation. Ayanna made it through flight school with top scores. She earned her wings and chose helicopters search and rescue because she wanted to be the one showing up when people needed hope the most. Then came Afghanistan. Her second tour changed everything. A night mission went wrong. Dust storm, engine failure, bad intel. Her co-pilot, Miles Bennett, took shrapnel when their bird got hit. Ayanna managed to land, stabilize him, and call for evac under enemy fire. But she never forgave herself for not calling off the mission earlier. Miles lived, but never flew again. Ayanna left the Air Force a year later, honorable discharge, with medals and citations. But the guilt came home with her. She tried private aviation, but everywhere she turned, she was still the girl in the room. Overlooked, talked over, passed by. So she took a job at Shoreline Grand. Serving drinks, cleaning up after brunch meetings, staying invisible until she couldn't anymore. Until today. Because when Ayanna Rhodes said, "I can fly it," it wasn't ego. It was a lifetime of rising through everything built to keep her grounded. The helicopter landed with surgical precision. The skids kissed the concrete helipad of the Skycrest Tower like a feather settling onto glass. No jolt, no stumble. Just smooth control, start to finish. Beckett Aldridge stepped out of the chopper, trying to play it cool, fixing his tie, smoothing his blazer. On the surface, he looked like the same man who had strutted into brunch that morning, running deals and cracking jokes. But inside, he was rattled. His heart still thudded from the flight. Not from fear, but from the realization that everything he thought he knew about power, about presence, about people, had just been turned inside out by a woman he'd barely noticed until today. Ayanna Rhodes. The same woman he'd publicly mocked in front of his investors. He watched her step out behind him, her expression calm, unreadable, like she'd done this 1,000 times. And maybe she had. The Skycrest executive team was already waiting, flanked by assistants and media staff. Beckett forced a grin, shook hands, exchanged greetings, and dropped into pitch mode like muscle memory. On paper, the deal was a success. Skycrest signed the joint venture agreement, a 9-figure partnership, full media rights. First phase funding released in 30 days. The champagne would be flowing at headquarters tonight. Everyone congratulated him. Everyone smiled. Everyone but Beckett. Because as he stood there, posing for photos with the CEO of Skycrest and a framed contract, he couldn't stop thinking about the helicopter. About Ayanna. About that moment when she calmly flipped the switch, took control, and left the entire rooftop speechless. And he couldn't stop hearing his own voice from earlier that morning, sharp, smug, and cruel. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you." He'd meant it as a joke, as a dig, as a performance. But she'd called his bluff, and then some. Now, as the cameras clicked and the investors buzzed about the numbers, Beckett felt the smallest pang in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Not about the deal, that was bulletproof. But about the way he saw people. About what he chose to value. About how blind he'd been to someone standing 3 feet away from him for months. The truth was, Beckett had built his empire on instincts. But today, those instincts had failed him. And Ayanna Rhodes? She didn't just challenge his ego. She challenged his entire worldview. And that was something no deal could fix. It was nearly midnight when Beckett found her. The rooftop of Shoreline Grand was quiet, the city stretching beneath a blanket of scattered lights. A gentle breeze stirred Ayanna's curls as she sat cross-legged near the edge, her back to him, gaze fixed on the skyline. She didn't turn when she heard footsteps. Didn't need to. "You're late," she said. Beckett paused, hands in his coat pockets, unsure how to even begin. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I'm not sure I do," she said calmly. He let that sit. The silence between them wasn't hostile, but it was real. And heavy. Not the kind of silence you break with clever lines or charm. Beckett walked a few steps closer, but kept his distance. "I owe you a lot more than a thank you, or even a promotion, but I came to give you something I should have offered a long time ago." Ayanna still didn't turn. "What's that?" He exhaled, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "An apology, a real one, for how I spoke to you, for what I assumed about you, for turning you into a punchline in front of people who didn't even deserve to breathe your air." That made her glance back just slightly. Her profile caught the city lights, and he could see the exhaustion in her expression. Not from flying, from being invisible. "I saw someone in a uniform and made every lazy assumption in the book," Beckett continued. "Not because you weren't good enough, but because I wasn't." "You think this speech makes it better?" she asked, voice still steady. "No," Beckett said quietly. "I don't think anything does, but you deserve to hear it." Ayanna stood slowly, facing him fully now. "I didn't fly that chopper to prove something to you," she said. "I did it because I refuse to let small men define what I'm capable of." Beckett nodded, taking the hit. "And I'm not asking for a second chance," he said. "I just didn't want to stay quiet. Not after what you showed me today." Ayanna searched his face, as if trying to measure the weight of his sincerity. "You know," she said after a moment, "people like you usually don't come back." "People like me don't usually get humbled," he replied. She smirked, just a little. "Then maybe tonight's a first." Beckett chuckled softly, and for the first time in hours, the tension cracked just slightly. Ayanna turned back toward the city. "You should go, Beckett." He hesitated, then nodded. But as he turned to leave, she added one more thing. "Next time you want to mock a black woman with a line like, 'Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you,'" she said, "you better be ready to put a ring on it." Beckett froze. And smiled. She wasn't just walking away. She was walking above him. The next morning, Beckett walked into his parents' estate in East Atlanta, an architectural masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows, art curated from Paris and New York, and a dining table long enough to seat a boardroom. But it felt colder than ever. His mother, Clarice Aldridge, sat near the fireplace, dressed in her usual morning attire, cashmere wrap, pearls, and a half-read copy of the Wall Street Journal in hand. His father, Douglas, stood near the bar cart, stirring his second espresso with the same precision he used in merger meetings. Beckett didn't get 2 steps in before the storm hit. "You embarrassed this family," Clarice said, not even looking up. Douglas didn't mince words either. "Are we seriously entertaining tabloid headlines about our son falling for some waitress?" Beckett froze. She's not just a waitress. Oh, I'm sure she's got a fascinating backstory, Clarice quipped, voice laced with sarcasm. But that doesn't mean you drag her into the spotlight. Not when our name is involved. Your name, Beckett replied, his jaw tight. Ayanna doesn't need the spotlight. She's been in war zones you couldn't survive 10 minutes in. Clarice scoffed. Spare us the hero speech. This isn't about her flying skills. It's about image, legacy. You want to gamble that on a scandal waiting to happen? Douglas stepped in, calmer but no less cutting. Do you know what the board said this morning? Investors are nervous. Media outlets are sniffing for the race angle. This isn't just bad optics, it's a liability. Beckett stepped forward. She's not a liability. She's the reason Skycrest didn't walk. Clarice folded her paper and finally looked at him. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the facts. You are a white man with a business empire. She is a black woman who flies helicopters and serves coffee. That is not a merger the public accepts without backlash. Beckett clenched his fists. Then let them talk. Let them choke on their expectations. I'm done living my life based on how it looks in a press release. Douglas shook his head slowly. This isn't rebellion, Beckett. It's sabotage. You walk this path. You walk it without our support. Beckett's voice was calm, dead steady. Then I walk it. Clarice narrowed her eyes. For how long, exactly? Until the headlines dry up? Until she gets tired of your world? No, Beckett said. Until people like you finally realize the world has changed. Then he turned and walked out again. But this time he didn't look back. Because love, he realized, is only real when it costs you something. And he was ready to pay in full. 2 weeks passed. Ayanna returned to her quiet life in Decatur, far from rooftop helipads and boardroom banter. She picked up extra shifts at the cafe, wore her name tag like armor, and smiled at regulars who had no idea what she had just flown through literally and figuratively. She had told herself the whole thing with Beckett was a moment, a brief, intense crossing of lives that were never meant to overlap. Still, late at night, when the cafe lights dimmed and she wiped down the counters, she would catch herself staring out the front window, half expecting to see him again. But he didn't come. Not until the email. It was short, from the National Aviation Academy. Subject line: Immediate opportunity. Ayanna Rhodes. At first, she thought it was spam. But then she saw the signature at the bottom. Mira Hutchins, Executive Director. And beneath that, a note. Mr. Beckett Aldridge recommended you personally. Her heart stopped. The offer was simple. The Academy was launching a new program for underrepresented women in aviation. They wanted Ayanna to be a founding flight instructor. Full benefits, flexible hours, room to build curriculum from the ground up, a speaking spot at the International Aviation Summit in Houston. She reread it 5 times, barely blinking. Ayanna sat back in the break room chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't a pity handout. This was legacy. This was everything she had quietly dreamed about while folding napkins and scrubbing espresso machines. A second chance on her terms. But a question hung heavy in her chest. Why him? Why now? That evening, as she walked home through the dusky Atlanta streets, her phone buzzed. A private number. She almost ignored it. But something told her to pick up. Hey, Beckett's voice said, soft but sure. She didn't answer right away. I figured you'd hear about the offer by now, he continued. I didn't do it to win you over. I did it because the world needs more women like you flying high. Ayanna's breath caught. And what do you need, Beckett? There was a pause on the line. Just one more chance, he said. To show up for you right this time. Ayanna didn't promise anything, but her silence wasn't angry this time. It was thoughtful. And somewhere, beneath the ache, a door cracked open. Because sometimes, the second flight is the one that truly takes off. It happened on a crisp Sunday morning, the kind of morning that makes the sky look endless and the clouds hang like dreams just within reach. Ayanna had been invited to do a routine demo flight with a few students from the academy. Nothing fancy, just a quick loop above Atlanta to boost morale and inspire the new cadets. She agreed, glad for the air, the solitude, the silence that flying always gave her. But when she arrived at the airstrip, something felt different. The hangar doors were open wide. A single Bell 429 helicopter stood on the tarmac, gleaming like it had just rolled out of a movie set. Its body was polished, its rotors still, waiting. And next to it stood Beckett. In jeans, a navy bomber jacket, and a nervous half-smile. Ayanna slowed her steps. "You're not a student." "Nope," Beckett said, stepping forward. "But I did get permission to be your co-pilot." She raised an eyebrow. "You bribed my boss." He grinned, "Only with a scholarship donation." They boarded in silence. Ayanna took the controls, steady hands guiding the craft into the air like it was born for her. The city unfolded beneath them, roads like rivers, rooftops like stories, the whole world stitched together in shades of morning gold. Halfway through the flight, Beckett cleared his throat through the headset. "Can I say something without getting tossed out mid-air?" Ayanna chuckled. "No promises." He exhaled. "I've spent my whole life chasing perfection, numbers, titles, legacy. But the only moment I ever felt like I wasn't pretending was when I looked at you and saw someone who survived hell and still smiles like the sky owes her nothing." Ayanna's hands tightened slightly on the controls. "I love you," Beckett said. "Not because you saved my deal. Not because you flew that chopper like a storm, but because you're the only person I know who doesn't need to be rescued but still lets people care." She turned to look at him. He was holding a ring. Simple, elegant, timeless. Engraved inside were two words: "Fly together." Beckett's voice cracked. "Ayanna Rhodes, will you marry me, and maybe fly the rest of this life with me?" The rotors hummed. The horizon stretched wide, and the only sound louder than the engine was the beating of her heart. Ayanna smiled. "Not the polite kind, the real one. Only if I get to keep the controls." Beckett laughed, his eyes misting. "Deal." And above a city that once tried to clip her wings, Ayanna finally soared. Not alone, not invisible, but seen, loved, and flying toward forever. Life has a way of testing us, especially when the world tells you that where you come from, or the color of your skin, defines how high you're allowed to soar. But Ayanna Rhodes? She didn't just defy gravity. She defied expectations. This wasn't just a story about a helicopter, or a contract, or even love. It was about self-worth, about identity, about standing tall in a world that too often tries to shrink you down to fit its narrow definition of success. Ayanna didn't need saving. What she needed, what so many of us need, was simply to be seen, not just for her job title or her appearance, but for her strength, her story, her brilliance. And Beckett? He learned that true leadership isn't about barking orders from a rooftop. It's about humility. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest one, but the one quietly holding everything together with grace. So if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, silenced, remember this: your past doesn't limit your altitude, and your worth was never up for negotiation. At Hidden Worth, we believe the greatest power lies in the stories we rarely hear, the ones buried under uniforms, job titles, or stereotypes. And when those stories rise, when voices like Ayanna's are finally amplified, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Worth for more real stories that remind us of one thing: no matter where you come from, you were born to fly.